History tells us that Chernobyl was an accident caused by human arrogance and mechanical failure. But history is written by the survivors. The dead tell a different story. April 23, 1986. Oleksiy rubs his eyes. They burn from 48 hours of double shifts. He is a senior turbine engineer, a man who understands the world through pressure gauges and thermal dynamics. He doesn't believe in luck. He doesn't believe in God. He believes in the hum of the RBMK reactor beneath his feet. He steps out onto the gantry of Unit 4 for a smoke, trying to clear the static from his head. The air over Pripyat is crisp, smelling of pine and wet concrete. It's quiet, logical, safe. Then the wind dies. Completely. Oleksiy feels the hair on his arm stand up. Not from cold, but from a sudden, primal drop in air pressure. He looks up at the ventilation stack, expecting to see the usual plume of steam. Instead, he sees a void. Hovering motionless against the stars is a shape that defies physics. It is darker than the night around it. Massive wings, spanning 20 feet, block out the moon. Oleksiy's rational mind tries to categorize it. Helicopter, crane shadow, exhaust trick. But the logic fails when the creature opens its eyes. Two burning red coals stare down from the darkness. They don't look animal. They look ancient. Oleksiy drops his cigarette. It sparks on the metal grate, the only sound in a dead world. He opens his mouth to shout, to call security, but his throat is paralyzed. He isn't looking at a bird. He is looking at an omen. And for the first time in his life, the man of science feels the terrified beat of a heart that knows it is about to stop. Oleksiy wasn't the only one. We are told that the panic in the control room on the night of the 26th was caused by a sudden power surge. We are told the mistakes made by Dyatlov and Akimov were caused by arrogance. But if you look at the secret files, the internal memos, and the diaries recovered from the exclusion zone, you find a different pattern. The crew wasn't just tired, they were terrified. For weeks, men like Oleksiy, hardened engineers, Soviet rationalists, were reporting things that shouldn't exist. Phone calls from dead lines, nightmares that woke entire dormitories, and a recurring silhouette in the sky that became known as the Black Bird of Chernobyl. They were warned, but they didn't speak the language of the warning. They were looking for radiation leaks, but the danger was written in a book most of them were forbidden to read, a book that predicts a falling star called Wormwood. Question: do you believe disasters attract dark entities, or do dark entities cause disasters? Answer attract or cause in the comments right now. Tonight we follow Oleksiy through the last 3 days of the old world. We are going to translate the warning he saw on the roof. Subscribe now to survive the fallout. The locker room of Unit 4 smelled of stale tobacco, industrial soap, and the faint copper tang of ozone that never really washed off. Oleksiy splashed freezing water onto his face, gasping as the shock hit his skin. He kept his eyes squeezed shut for a long moment, gripping the porcelain edges of the sink until his knuckles turned white. He was a man of science. He was a senior engineer. He did not believe in monsters. When he looked up into the mirror, he saw a man who hadn't slept in 30 hours. The dark circles under his eyes looked like bruises. But behind the exhaustion, there was something else. A flicker of doubt. Because what he had seen on the roof wasn't a trick of the light. It wasn't a cloud formation. Shadows don't have mass. Shadows don't displace the air around them. And shadows certainly don't have eyes that burn like the core of a reactor. He dried his face with a rough towel, telling himself it was stress. Just stress. The safety test was coming up in 3 days. Management was breathing down everyone's necks. Moscow wanted results. The pressure was high enough to crack the concrete foundation, let alone the human mind. He slammed his locker shut. The metallic clang echoed too loudly in the tiled room. "You saw it too, didn't you?" The voice came from the corner of the room. Oleksiy froze. It was Dmitri. a junior pump operator. The kid looked terrible. His skin was gray, clammy, and he was sitting on the bench with his head in his hands, staring at the floor. Oleksiy didn't turn around. He focused on the combination lock in his hand. "Saw what, Dmitri? The quota report? Yes, I saw it. We're behind." "The bird," Dmitri whispered. The word hung in the air like a curse. Oleksiy turned slowly. "Go to sleep, Dmitri. You're talking nonsense." "I was on the walkway by the turbine hall," the boy continued, his voice trembling. "2 nights ago, I went out for a smoke. It was standing on the railing, just standing there, watching me. It didn't look like a bird, Oleksiy. It looked like a man who had been burned alive, wrapped in wings made of oil. It had no face, just those eyes, those red eyes." Oleksiy felt a cold shiver crawl up his spine. It was the exact description, the exact same detail. "Hallucinations are common with sleep deprivation," Oleksiy said, his voice hard, clinical. He was reciting the manual now. Defense mechanism. "Go to the infirmary, get some pills. If I hear you spreading ghost stories to the shift supervisor, I'll have you written up for instability." He walked out before the boy could answer. He had to leave. He had to get away from the validation of his own fear, because if Dmitri saw it too, then it wasn't a hallucination. And if it wasn't a hallucination, then the laws of physics, the laws that kept the reactor safe, the laws that kept the world making sense, were already broken. The drive home to his apartment in Pripyat was a blur. Pripyat was the jewel of the Soviet Union, a city of the future, the Atom City. Roses bloomed in the manicured flower beds. Children played in the sandboxes. The giant yellow Ferris wheel stood waiting for the May Day celebration, a symbol of joy and progress. But to Oleksiy, the city felt different tonight. The streetlights seemed too dim. The shadows between the apartment blocks seemed too deep. He felt like he was driving through a model city, a display case that was about to be smashed. He got into his apartment, locked the door, and poured himself a glass of vodka. He sat in his armchair, staring at the television without turning it on. The silence of the apartment usually brought him peace. Tonight, it felt heavy, suffocating. Then, the phone rang. It was a sharp, mechanical trill that made him jump. He checked his watch. 2:15 a.m. Who would be calling at this hour? The plant. Had something happened with the pumps? He picked up the receiver. "Yes? Oleksiy speaking." Silence. "Hello? Is this the control room?" There was no voice on the other end. But the line wasn't dead. He could hear something, a sound that made the hair on his arms stand up again. It was a low, wet, rhythmic sound. Breathing. But it was too slow to be human. It sounded like air being forced through a crushed windpipe. And beneath the breathing, there was a faint, high-pitched static, like a Geiger counter clicking rapidly in a high radiation zone. "Who is this?" Oleksiy shouted, his grip on the phone tightening. "Is this a joke? Dmitri, is that you?" The breathing stopped. For a second, there was absolute silence. Then, a sound came through the earpiece that Oleksiy would never forget. It was a screech. A distorted electronic shriek that sounded like metal tearing against metal, mixed with the cry of a predatory bird. It was so loud, so piercing, that he dropped the receiver. It dangled by its cord, swaying back and forth. The screeching continued, tinny and distant now, filling the quiet room. Oleksiy ripped the cord out of the wall. The apartment went silent again. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in the chair watching the window, watching the sky. Every time a cloud passed over the moon, he flinched, expecting to see that wingspan. He told himself it was a prank. The guys at the plant were stressed. They were messing with him. That was the logical explanation. But the nightmares came anyway. When he finally dozed off just before dawn, he didn't dream of his wife or his childhood. He dreamed of fire. He dreamed he was standing in the control room, but the panels were melting. The plastic buttons were dripping like wax. The walls were transparent, and outside, the sky was purple. And there, floating just beyond the glass, was the creature. It wasn't just watching anymore, it was pointing, a long, shadowed finger pointing down at the core. Oleksiy looked down. The floor was gone. He was staring directly into the reactor, but it wasn't uranium fuel rods he saw. It was a mouth, a gaping, fiery maw that was opening to swallow the world. He woke up screaming. April 25th, the day before. The atmosphere in the plant was brittle. You could snap it like a dry twig. The scheduled maintenance shutdown had been delayed. Kiev grid controller wouldn't let them power down yet. The test, the safety test that required them to disable the emergency cooling system, was pushed to the night shift. Oleksiy walked the floor of the turbine hall. The vibration of the massive generators usually soothed him. Today, it felt like the earth was trembling. He saw the reports on the supervisor's desk. They weren't maintenance logs. They were security complaints. 4 more calls, 3 more sightings. A security guard at the perimeter fence had fired his weapon into the air, claiming a giant man with wings had tried to pick him up. The guard was sent home, drunk, they said. Mass hysteria, the supervisor muttered, stamping a form. Everyone is cracking up. We need a vacation, Oleksiy. Maybe we should postpone the test, Oleksiy said quietly. It was the first time he had voiced the thought. The crew is tired. The equipment is behaving strangely. The supervisor laughed. It was a hollow, barking sound. Postpone? For what? Because some conscript saw a big owl? Because you had a bad dream? This is the Soviet Union, Oleksiy. We do not stop for fairy tales. We run the test. We get the bonus. We go home. Oleksiy nodded. He didn't argue. He walked back to his station. But as he passed the window that looked out over the Pripyat River, he stopped. The sun was setting. The sky was a bruised purple, bleeding into black. And there, perched on the highest lightning rod of the ventilation stack, barely visible against the dying light, was the silhouette. It wasn't hiding anymore. It wasn't gliding. It was waiting. It was the herald. In the old stories, the ones his grandmother used to whisper when the party wasn't listening, the black bird didn't bring death. It didn't cause the tragedy. It simply arrived to mark the spot where the grave would be dug. Oleksiy placed his hand against the cold glass. He looked at the creature, and he felt a strange, terrible calm wash over him. The logic was gone. The physics were irrelevant. The warning had been delivered over and over again in the language of fear, and they had ignored it. The phone lines had screamed, the workers had begged, the sky itself had darkened with the shadow of the beast. The creature spread its wings. They were immense, blotting out the first stars of the evening. It pushed off the lightning rod and soared straight up, vanishing into the clouds directly above reactor number 4. Oleksiy turned back to the control room. The lights were humming. The operators were laughing, drinking coffee, preparing for the night shift, preparing for the test. God help us, Oleksiy whispered to the empty corridor. But he knew, with a certainty that chilled his blood, that God had already left the building. The only thing watching them now was the bird. April 26th, 1986. 12:30 a.m., 30 minutes before the test begins. While the operators in Control Room 4 were checking their flow rates and disabling the emergency shutdown systems, Oleksiy was not at his post. He had used his break to drive out to the edge of the exclusion zone. Before it was called an exclusion zone. He drove to the village of Kopachi, just 4 kilometers from the reactor. He needed to speak to someone who didn't care about socialism, quotas, or physics. He needed to speak to someone who remembered the old names. He found his grandmother, Baba Olena, sitting on her porch in the dark. She was 80 years old, a woman who had survived the Holodomor, the Nazi occupation, and the Soviet purges. She was peeling potatoes in the dark, her hands moving by memory. She didn't look up when Oleksiy walked through the gate. She just spoke, her voice dry as dead leaves. "You smell like iron, Oleksiy. You smell like lightning." Oleksiy sat on the wooden steps. He was trembling. The image of the black bird was burned into his retinas. "Baba," he whispered, "I saw something. At the plant. A shadow. It had eyes like fire." The old woman stopped peeling. She placed the knife down slowly. She turned to him, and in the moonlight her eyes looked ancient. She didn't ask if he was drunk. She didn't ask if he was tired. She simply nodded. "The black bird," she said. "The herald." "What is it?" Alexei begged. "Is it a demon? Is it a ghost?" "It is an angel," she replied, but she didn't say it with comfort. She said it with dread. "Not all angels bring peace, Alexei. Some blow trumpets, some pour bowls of wrath." She reached into the deep pocket of her apron and pulled out a small, tattered book. It was wrapped in a cloth to hide it from the authorities. A Bible. In the Soviet Union, this book was contraband. To Alexei, the atheist engineer, it was a collection of fairy tales, but tonight he didn't pull away. "You build your towers," she said, flipping through the thin, yellowed pages. "You split the atom. You think you are gods, but you have forgotten where you live." She pointed a gnarled finger at the field beyond the fence. It was overgrown with dark, bitter weeds. "What is that plant, Alexei?" He looked. "It's mugwort, Artemisia vulgaris." "No," she snapped. "Use the Ukrainian name." Alexei hesitated. "Polin," he said. "And the other name? The name of the black variety?" The word stuck in his throat. He knew it. Everyone knew it. It was the name of the region. It was the name of the plant that grew wild over the graves of their ancestors. "Chernobyl," he whispered. "Chernobyl." The word hung in the cold night air. The Chernobyl plant. The black stalk. Baba Olena pushed the book into his hands. Her finger rested on a specific passage. The Book of Revelation. Chapter 8. "Read," she commanded. Alexei looked down. The text was in Old Cyrillic, but he could make it out. He began to read, his voice shaking, stumbling over the words that felt less like scripture and more like a police report from the future. "And the third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp, and it fell upon the third part of the rivers and upon the fountains of waters." He stopped. His engineer's mind immediately began to process the imagery. A star burning as a lamp. Not a bomb, not an explosion of fire, a lamp, a beam of light. If the reactor lid blew, if the graphite caught fire, the beam of ionized plasma shooting into the sky would look exactly like a star. A pillar of light connecting earth and heaven. "Read the next line," Olena whispered. Alexei swallowed hard. "And the name of the star is called Wormwood, and the third part of the waters became wormwood, and many men died of the waters because they were made bitter." The book slipped from his fingers and hit the dirt. "And the name of the star is called Wormwood, and the name of the star is called Chernobyl." It wasn't a metaphor, it was a map. Alexei stared at the nuclear power plant glowing on the horizon. The pride of the Soviet Union, the Vladimir Ilyich Lenin nuclear power plant. But to the locals, it was simply the Chernobyl plant, the Wormwood plant. They had built a machine capable of poisoning the waters of the earth, and they had named it after the very prophecy that predicted it. "The water," Alexei stammered. "The cooling ponds, the Pripyat River. It feeds into the Dnieper. It feeds Kiev. It feeds millions." "Many men died of the waters," Olena repeated, her voice void of emotion, "because they were made bitter." The realization hit Alexei with the force of a physical blow. The black bird wasn't a monster. It was the third angel. It had been circling the towers for weeks, waiting for the trumpet to sound, waiting for the star to fall. He looked at his watch. 1 a.m. The test was scheduled to start in 23 minutes. "I have to stop them," Alexei gasped. He scrambled up from the porch steps. "I have to tell Akimov. I have to tell them about the name, about the star." Baba Olena didn't move. She picked up her knife and went back to peeling the potato. "You cannot stop a prophecy, grandson. It was written before you were born. The star has already fallen. You are just waiting for the sound." Oleksiy ran to his car. He fumbled with the keys, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He tore out of the village, the tires screeching on the dirt road. As he sped back toward the glowing silhouette of the power plant, the words of the revelation echoed in his mind, looping over and over, burning as it were a lamp. He looked up through the windshield. The sky above Unit 4 was clear, but in his mind, he could see the shadow of the wings. The bird was gone. The warning phase was over. The execution phase had begun. He slammed his foot on the accelerator. He passed the Pripyat 1970 concrete sign. He passed the red forest. He could see the ventilation stack now. He could see the lights of the control room. 1:20 a.m. He parked his car illegally near the administrative block and ran. He sprinted through the checkpoints, flashing his ID badge, ignoring the guards. He burst into the hallway leading to the control room. The air felt electric. Static charged the hair on his arms. The very atmosphere was ionizing. The reactor was unstable. He could feel it in his teeth. He reached the heavy metal doors of Control Room 4. He could hear voices inside, confusion, shouting. "The power is too low! Pull the rods! Pull them all!" Oleksiy grabbed the handle. He was going to burst in. He was going to scream about the Bible. He was going to scream about Wormwood. He was going to look Akimov in the eye and tell him that they were fulfilling the apocalypse. But his hand froze on the latch, because through the thick steel of the door, he heard another sound. It wasn't the alarms. It wasn't the shouting of the engineers. It was the sound of heavy, leathery wings beating against the air, a slow, rhythmic thump. Thump, thump, coming from inside the control room, and then a voice, not Akimov's, not Dyatlov's, a voice that sounded like grinding stones. "AZ-5. Oleksiy stepped back. Inside the room, Akimov's hand hovered over the emergency shutdown button, the button that was supposed to save them, the button that, due to a fatal design flaw, would detonate the core. 1:23:40 a.m. "Press it!" someone screamed. Oleksiy squeezed his eyes shut. The button clicked. For a heartbeat, there was silence. The silence of a held breath. The silence of a prophecy fulfilled. Then, the floor jumped. The roar that followed didn't sound like an explosion. It sounded like the earth screaming. The walls cracked. The lights shattered. And Oleksiy was thrown backward into the darkness as the roof of Unit 4 was torn open, and the star of Wormwood shot a beam of ionized blue fire 3,000 meters into the night sky. The waters were about to become bitter. The sound of the apocalypse is not a bang. It is a crack, like the spine of the world snapping in two. For Oleksiy, lying dazed in the dust-choked corridor, the world had turned into a silent gray static. The blast had thrown him against the concrete wall, knocking the wind and the logic right out of him. He gasped, inhaling dust that tasted of chalk and something else, something metallic, something sour. It coated his tongue instantly. It wasn't the taste of smoke. It was the taste of ionization. It was the taste of heavy atoms tearing through soft tissue. He pushed himself up. The emergency lights were flickering, casting chaotic, strobing shadows against the debris. The heavy steel doors to Control Room 4, doors that were designed to withstand a plane crash, were buckled outward. Oleksiy stumbled toward the breach. He didn't run. His legs felt heavy like he was wading through deep water. "Akimov," he croaked. "Dyatlov?" He looked inside. The control room was a graveyard of technology. Panels were ripped from the walls. Wires hung like guts from the ceiling, sparking and hissing. The men inside were moving like ghosts, stumbling through the haze, shouting orders that made no sense. "The tank! The water tank exploded! Check the control rods! They are stuck!" Oleksiy stood in the doorway, staring at the main panel. The rod indicators were frozen, but he wasn't looking at the dials. He was looking at the faces of his colleagues. Their skin was already changing. A dark, flush redness like a deep sunburn was blooming on their cheeks, the nuclear tan. They didn't know. They thought it was a hydrogen tank. They thought the reactor was still intact. But Oleksiy turned around. He looked down the hallway where the outer wall of the building used to be. There was a hole, a jagged, gaping wound in the side of the facility, and through that hole he could see the night sky. He walked toward it, drawn like a moth to a flame. He stepped out onto the debris field. The air was hot, unnaturally hot. It shimmered with heat waves that distorted the stars. He looked down at his feet. Scattered across the asphalt were blocks, smooth, black blocks of graphite. Oleksiy froze. He knew what those were. Every engineer knew what those were. They were the moderator blocks. They belonged inside the core. If the graphite was on the ground, there was no core. He looked up, and then he fell to his knees. Baba Olena's voice screamed in his memory, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning, as it were, a lamp. Rising from the ruins of reactor number 4 was a pillar of light. It wasn't fire. It was a beam of pure ethereal blue, the ionization glow. The air itself was being ripped apart by the sheer intensity of the radiation shooting straight up into the atmosphere. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. It looked exactly like a star that had fallen to Earth and was burning its way back out. It was the lamp of the apocalypse. "Wormwood," Oleksiy whispered. The word tasted like blood. The beam pierced the clouds, illuminating the smoke that billowed from the crater. The smoke was multicolored, black soot, white steam, and the iridescent shimmer of burning uranium. And swirling within that toxic column, riding the updrafts of the most deadly fire in human history, was the shadow. The black bird. It was there. Oleksiy saw it clearly against the glow of the beam. It wasn't fleeing the radiation. It was bathing in it. The massive wings were spread wide, embracing the fallout. It circled the pillar of light, spiraling higher and higher, dragging the poison up into the jet stream. Sirens began to wail in the distance. The firefighters, the first responders from Pripyat, the heroes who would be dead in 2 weeks. Oleksiy watched as the trucks raced toward the reactor. He wanted to run out and stop them. He wanted to scream, "Don't go near the graphite! It's the star! It's the star!" But he couldn't move. The lethargy of the radiation was already setting in. His joints ached. Nausea rolled over him in a sickening wave. He watched a young firefighter jump off a truck not 50 meters away. The boy, he couldn't have been more than 20, picked up a piece of the black graphite. He held it in his hand, looking at it curiously. "Drop it!" Oleksiy wheezed, his voice barely a whisper. The firefighter looked at the glowing blue beam, then at the black rock. He didn't drop it. He simply collapsed. The prophecy was unfolding in real time, and the third part of the waters became Wormwood. Oleksiy looked at the sky. The wind was changing. He could feel it. The plume of radioactive smoke was shifting, banking north and west, towards the Pripyat River, towards the Dnieper, towards the reservoirs. The ash was falling now, gentle gray flakes drifting down like snow. It landed on Oleksiy's shoulders. It landed on the grass. It landed on the water of the cooling ponds. Every flake was a seed of death. Cesium, strontium, iodine, 131. The waters were becoming bitter. Oleksiy closed his eyes. He imagined the map of Europe. He imagined the invisible clouds spreading out, carrying the name of this place to the ends of the earth. Chernobyl, Wormwood. He felt a presence beside him. He opened his eyes. The black bird had landed. It stood on a pile of rubble just 10 feet away. The heat from the reactor core was enough to melt steel, but the creature stood there, untouched. Its feathers were not feathers. They were like oil, shifting and slick. It turned its head. The red eyes were gone. In the blue light of the reactor beam, its eyes were white, blind white orbs that saw everything. It looked at Oleksiy. It didn't screech. It didn't attack. It simply nodded. A single slow nod of acknowledgement. The message is delivered. The seal is broken. Then, with a sound like a cracking whip, it launched itself into the air. Oleksiy watched it fly straight into the blue column of light. It dissolved into the beam, becoming one with the radiation, becoming the ghost in the machine that would haunt this forest for the next 10,000 years. Oleksiy lay back on the asphalt. The ground was warm. He felt strangely peaceful. The fear was gone. The anxiety of the warning was gone. Now, there was only the certainty of the end. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the crumpled page Baba Olena had given him. He held it up to the light of the burning reactor. The paper turned black and crumbled to ash in his hand. "And many men died," Oleksiy recited to the burning sky, "because the waters were made bitter." He coughed and saw blood on his palm. The star of Wormwood had fallen, and the long night of Chernobyl had begun. Oleksiy died 2 weeks later in Hospital Number 6 in Moscow. He was buried in a lead-lined coffin, soldered shut, to keep the soil safe from his bones. Like many of the first responders, the firemen, and the turbine engineers, he was erased from the official narrative. His death certificate cited heart failure. It said nothing of acute radiation syndrome. It said nothing of the 600 Roentgens that had dissolved his DNA. And it certainly said nothing of the black bird. But before the morphine took him, Oleksiy whispered his story to a nurse. He didn't speak of the pain. He didn't speak of the burns that covered 90% of his body. He spoke only of the eyes, the red eyes that had watched the reactor die. "It wasn't a monster," he told her, his voice a dry rattle. "It was a witness. It comes to watch us fall." After the explosion, the sightings in Pripyat stopped instantly. The phone calls ceased. The nightmares ended, replaced by the very real waking nightmare of evacuation and sickness. The winged shadow that had terrified the workers of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant for weeks simply vanished. Cryptozoologists and paranormal investigators have spent decades analyzing the timeline, and the pattern is impossible to ignore. In 1967, in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, a creature known as the Mothman terrorized the town for months. It possessed the same glowing red eyes, the same massive wingspan. It was seen by over 100 people. Then, on December 15th, the Silver Bridge collapsed, killing 46 people. After the disaster, the Mothman was never seen in Point Pleasant again. 19 years later, almost to the day, the blackbird appeared in Ukraine. It circled the tower. It warned the people. And the moment the reactor blew, it left. Some say it is a demon that feeds on tragedy. Others, like Oleksiy's grandmother, believe it is an angelic sentry, a cosmic alarm system that we are too arrogant to understand. It doesn't cause the disaster. It appears where the fabric of reality is about to tear. It appears where death is already inevitable. But the most terrifying part of this story isn't the bird, it isn't the monster, it is the map. We cannot escape the linguistics. We cannot escape the translation. The plant was built near the city of Chernobyl. The word Chernobyl is the Ukrainian word for the plant Artemisia vulgaris. In English, Artemisia vulgaris is translated as wormwood. 2,000 years ago, John of Patmos sat in a cave and wrote the book of Revelation. He wrote of the end times. He wrote of a star falling from the sky, burning like a lamp. He wrote that this star would poison the waters and make them bitter. And he wrote that the name of the star was Wormwood. The Soviet Union, an empire built on atheism and science, accidentally built their doomsday machine on the exact plot of land named in the Bible. They named the poison after the prophecy. Was it a coincidence? Is it just a grim irony of translation? Or did we receive a warning that transcended time, language, and logic? A warning we chose to ignore until the sky turned blue with ionization? The sarcophagus over Unit 4 is crumbling. The radiation inside is still hot. It will remain hot for 20,000 years. The star of Wormwood is still burning beneath the concrete, sleeping with one eye open. And as for the black bird, it hasn't been seen in the exclusion zone since 1986. But the world is a volatile place. Dams crack, bridges rust, reactors age. So, the next time you are walking home at night, the next time you feel a sudden drop in air pressure, or hear a sound like heavy, wet wings beating against the silence, don't look up, because if you see it, it's already too late. This has been Channel Name. If you believe the black bird was a warning, hit the like button. If you believe it was the cause, share this video. And I have one final question for you to answer in the comments. If the black bird appeared over your city tonight, would you run, or would you accept the fate? Let me know. I'll be down there reading your theories. Make sure you are subscribed and have the bell notification turned on. You don't want to miss the next warning. Stay safe. Stay watching.